Hey everyone, welcome back to the Radio Resistance podcast. I'm Kumayl here with my co-host and brother Zoubair. Um, Today's episode, it might surprise some of you. We're talking about why, as Afghan Americans, we're choosing to vote for Donald Trump. Now, I know that's not something you hear every day, especially in our community, but there's a lot behind this decision. Zoubair, when you think about the conversations you've had with other Afghan Americans, friends, family, people in our community, why do you think this shift is resonating with so many from our communities?
Well, I think it's because uh, what we've seen for the last 3 years. And that's why I don't think it should be surprising to many, at least to the Afghan community. It really shouldn't be surprising because it's been a disaster for 3 years. The situation in Afghanistan, meaning under the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration. So Kamala Harris would just be an extension of Joe Biden, of his policies. And do we want to see 4 more years of this, right? I think it's really that simple.
Exactly. And it's not just about Afghanistan either. There's also this growing feeling that our values, things like family, faith, and tradition aren't reflected in the way we thought they'd be. Um, so we'll get into all of that today. But first, so let's talk about what's happened in Afghanistan, specifically Biden's approach, the withdrawal, and where US aid is actually going right now.
Yeah, so I think that's number one, right? For 3 years, it's been sending cash shipments to the Taliban. A lot of people get surprised by that when you mention that to whether it's just ordinary Americans or even sometimes some Afghans who aren't really they haven't been following the situation. They'll say, "Wait, what do you mean?" It's like, yeah, America has been sending in what they call aid to Afghanistan's central bank, and the numbers are pretty much average a minimum of $40 million a week. But if you actually look at the larger sum, it's closer to $80 million every 10 days. So we've seen this. The Afghanistan central bank confirmed it, like they acknowledged this and they're saying, thank you for this money, right? Afghanistan
Hmm.
central bank is run by the Taliban, the Afghanistan bank. And yeah, cash shipments, shrink wrapped cash shipments going to Afghanistan every 10 days, $80 million. That's the reason the Taliban are still standing. So,
Right.
what do you think about that?
No, yeah, right. And that's the frustrating part. The intention, might be to help, but the reality is that this funding is flowing through channels that are, as John mentioned, controlled by the Taliban. It's hard to watch, knowing, that the people who need that aid the most are actually the least likely to receive it. Um, and it's not just the money. There's this perception that Biden's approach has been, it's not, in my opinion, just the perception, but it's been too soft on the Taliban, right? What do you think about that, Zoubair? Uh, have there been more, is there more that Biden could have done
Of
in
course.
relation to this, right?
Of course, because it all starts from the initial withdrawal, how that happened, right? It was just
Hmm.
like, okay, here we go. We're going down to zero, right? We're everyone out and we're gonna just leave everything behind to the Taliban. And that's it. And that's the end of it. And then we're gonna declare the end of the longest war in US history and take credit for this. Yeah.
It feels like an appeasement strategy. It's like the Biden administration has chosen, this route of diplomacy with a regime that now it's like it's not even if we say openly oppresses its people and it crushes dissent. It's we're past that. It's the only
Yeah.
country in the world where girls haven't been able to go to school for 3 years now.
And we'll look. We'll get into the specific details, but it's like the logic behind what's happening, right? So okay, pull out. Then it's like sustaining this status quo, which is well, since we left the country, we ended this war. Well, we're not going to fight them now, so we might as well not look bad and just keep sending the Taliban money to at least let the country be standing, so it doesn't make the mess on us, right? So it doesn't look like we created this mess and that whatever is happening there is our problem. But
Yeah,
that is what is happening, right? It's like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
the Taliban since day one. They started in the very beginning, started
Hmm.
marching their suicide bombing armies. From the very beginning, girls' schools get shut down. All the edicts of women not being able to go out in public and all that, going after former soldiers. So it's like that happened from the very beginning, and there's no accountability. Biden never raised his voice. He never mentioned any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's just
There's been no
we're gonna
acknowledgement whatsoever.
exactly no acknowledgement. It's just like, oh, Afghanistan's done now. Let's just leave that in the background while we're sending them on, low key sending them $80 million every 10 days. It's in the past now. No one's gonna ask about Afghanistan because the war is over. And it's like
Yeah.
3 years of that. While
Yeah.
all these human rights violations are happening, we've been following it, and we don't want this to happen anymore. Like, we're done with this.
Exactly, exactly. And here's where the shift comes in for a lot of us. We
Yeah.
see that, a leader, we need a leader who's willing, at the very, very least, to stop this funding, to make a strong stand against regimes like the Taliban, right? There
Well,
might be
actually,
other. Mhm.
can I stop you? Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah,
At
go
the
ahead.
very, very least, one step even before that, at the very, very least, acknowledging the
Acknowledge.
screw up. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, this is a mess.
Fact,
Acknowledging
fact.
that, yeah, that's a terrorist regime over there. And yeah, we could have done this better. And yeah, we should probably do something to change what's happening. And then
Yeah.
there you go. So that's for the first step. The second step is, now what do we do? Well, I don't know. Maybe let's stop sending them $80 million every 10 days.
Yeah, and so President Trump's stance is a lot clearer on this. We never saw any sort of like endless aid to governments that don't respect human rights. And a lot of people criticize the whole agreement itself, engaging itself, and that's a whole discussion in and of itself, which
Well, let's
you
just
wanted to
mention it
get
quick.
into.
Can I
Okay,
just
well,
ask
sure.
you? Just let me just ask
Yeah,
you. If I'm
yeah.
I'm a layman, I'm asking you. So what agreement?
The
Why are people blaming Trump?
Yeah, so the Doha Agreement was, what essentially led to the fall of Afghanistan. And this was an agreement that many, associate and affiliate to Donald Trump's previous presidency. It's because the Doha Agreement started, the Doha talks, and the Doha Agreement was signed under President Donald Trump's presidency. Um, so what that was it was a series of talks that began um, with the intention of when withdrawal of the U.S. and NATO troops were announced by the government of the United States. Um, it, they saw a need for intra-Afghan peace talks, and this was the new approach was that we need to have the Taliban included in these peace talks as well. That was
Okay.
the idea behind like the framework of this agreement. Now, there were issues. There were plenty of issues with the agreement itself. It excluded the people of Afghanistan. It excluded the people of the United States of America as well. Um, uh, this whole plan was now it was orchestrated by an individual called Zalmay Khalilzad, and this individual was appointed during President Trump's time as the special ambassador for Afghanistan. And thankfully, President Trump sees, the trickery and the deceit, and has called this individual a con man for, what he has done. More importantly, though, Zubair John, um, many in relation to the Doha Agreement, what I wanted to bring up was that many, bring this up and try to say that it was, during President Trump's time, but they always forget to mention how this agreement and the part of it that made us feel safe still under President Donald Trump is that it was a conditions-based agreement. And we know how President Trump operates with such situations. If a terrorist organization is going to try to strong arm or try to, and then we don't even need to speculate here. We heard it from the horse's mouth, as they say. We heard from President Trump's mouth. This deal was terminated the second that the Taliban broke it. Now, from that time till now, how many other violations the Taliban have had? That has given President Biden numerous opportunities to come out and say, hey, you know what? That agreement that was signed under my predecessor's time, it was a horrible agreement, and here's the proof for it. Here's the proof. The Taliban have been doing this, this, and this.
Well, and why
We
is he
haven't
not?
seen that.
And the reason that he's not doing that, is it because it must just be because, well, he executed the deal and it just went horribly under his execution, and if he brings it up now, it will make him look bad. Right?
You want to know what the
admit
proof
that.
is? You know what the proof is for that? Well, I hadn't even heard you express this before, but the proof here is when Kamala Harris in that debate brings up Afghanistan. The only time she was asked sometime after that if there was anything that she'd do different. And I was expecting, honestly, to hear maybe Afghanistan be brought up. Nothing. Yeah. She says, I wouldn't have done anything, different. She claims to have been the last one in the room when the withdrawal decisions was made.
So this is, that's a very important point then. So right there, that's when people say, well, why are you guys voting for Trump? Right? That's another very just common sense point. I mean, Kamala Harris is asked, what would you have done different to avoid this chaotic, destructive, embarrassing withdrawal and the policy for the last 3 years? What would you have done different? And she says, nothing. So
well, she was asked a little bit more generally as far as during the entire time of her vice presidency, was there anything you would have done differently? And she couldn't have mentioned Afghanistan. She was able to. My point, with bringing it up in the debate, that was just to score a point. Is the point? She was just trying to score a point, just like how Biden, with a smirk on his face, said it that one time just a few months after August in 2021 at it was a deal signed by President Trump, and that's it. Everything after that, every mistake, everything that happened, just brush it under the rug to protect the legacy of our non-president president, whoever our president is, actually.
Yeah, so that's what it comes down to then. So this deal, Trump was, he comes up with this idea, sits with his representatives, with his experts and stuff, they go to Doha, they have this deal. The deal has conditions like any deal, like when you sign a lease, right, for an apartment, right, you're leasing out an apartment. There's terms and conditions to the lease, right? Yeah. Fine print and everything. In fact, that stuff isn't even in fine print. It's part of the main,
the core
of the leases. Yeah, the core text is okay, you're going to get this apartment for this much per month. However, you cannot do these things and you have to do these things. So naturally, if you're the building owner or the landlord and your tenant they violate any of those things, what happens? The lease is over. You're out. You violated the lease, you're done. And that's one of the things Trump, as a developer, right, as a businessman, he gets this. That's why he said it. He's like, it was terminated. He's like, it's done. Because now you embarrassed me. We had a deal and you guys violated everything. And this administration won't even acknowledge that it was violated because they carried out the deal. They executed it. And then they were in charge of following through with the deal for the next 3 years. And they just completely, instead of even acknowledging it, they're like, they made it worse. They're like, here you go, here's $40 million a week for what you're doing. $40 million.
That just
it's insane.
It brings me, to our next point as well. It's not just, about cutting aid. It's about who the United States chooses to support instead, right? So the people in Afghanistan who, when the fall happened in August 2021, as the withdrawal was happening, Kabul collapses, the Taliban take over, right? The people in Afghanistan, there were people who continued what the U.S. government under Biden ended, which was the war on terror, right? The people in Afghanistan there are people in there who are still fighting for democracy and freedom, and they are who deserve America's backing. Okay, so who I'm referring to is about the resistance in Afghanistan. We're not the only ones who've felt abandoned by U.S. policies. There are people in Afghanistan, the ones who've risked their lives fighting the Taliban, who feel it even more deeply. Zoubair, can you give our listeners some background on who these democratic resistance fighters are?
Yeah, so obviously, the way you said it, it sounds nice for our American friends, democratic resistance fighters fighting for democracy and freedom. But for our own listeners, I just want to make this clear. Our own Afghan crowd, because sometimes they'll be like, they've grown cynical to this. Oh, we're fighting for democracy or freedom. Listen, it's actually simpler than that, right? They're not fighting for necessarily democracy. They're fighting for basic human rights. They're fighting against clear and apparent oppression. If anyone comes into your house, right, without asking, and they come in and they, I don't know, do terrible things to your family members, to your wife and to your daughters, you're going to fight back. You're going to defend your house. And it's that simple. That's what the resistance is doing. So, yeah, the president fled, the army collapses, people go into hiding. But one person decided to take a stand, and that's Commander Ahmed Massoud, who said, no, I'm not leaving. I'm going to do what my father would have done, and I'm going to fight for this country. Goes to Panjshir, they mobilize. The resistance is fighting till this day. They're in the mountains. They're doing guerrilla attacks throughout key cities without.
Who are those people? Who are the actual forces?
Yeah, and those are people who served the country for 20 years, right? They were members of the Afghanistan National Defense and Security Forces. So
the left behind allies, right?
The left behind allies, exactly. These are people who, put their life on the line. They served the country for 20 years. These are now the generals and commanders in the NRF, in the National Resistance Front.
Yeah, and these are people who, switching back to, I guess, our American listeners and viewers, broadly, generally, American, Afghan-American, any sort of American, that's who I want to speak to right now. These are, the resistance fighters are people who, I hate to say I want to say are our allies, but they were our allies during the war on terror. Our government decided to end that war. It's an ongoing one. It's gotten even more dangerous. In any case, they stood with the United States, and now they're fighting to protect the values we all believe in: freedom, human rights, the right to an education. But under this administration, these groups have all been overlooked, not being engaged with whatsoever. We're engaging with terrorists, but not with the democratic forces of Afghanistan. And that's the painful irony of it all. These are, again, individuals are people who share our values, who want to free Afghanistan, who've literally, as Zoubair mentioned as well, put their lives on the line for democracy. Supporting them, it's a natural choice, right? But instead they're left out in the cold. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, they were also our allies from even further back, right? Since the 80s, when Afghanistan was fighting the Soviet Union, America was supporting Afghanistan in that fight because they didn't want communism to grow and to expand, to take over. So naturally, the US found an ally in Afghanistan, which was our people who were like, we don't want communism either.
Keyword, naturally.
Naturally, it's like common sense. So what did they do? They supported the Mujahideen. And who was the key Mujahideen fighter who was dubbed as the Afghan who won the Cold War? Ahmad Shah Massoud. So he later, his group, after the Soviet Union is defeated, then becomes the leading group to fight terrorism within Afghanistan. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda. And then when 9/11 happens, right, America goes right back to this group, who then they dub as the Northern Alliance. And they say, okay, let's fight the Taliban. Let's take them down. And his son, whose image is behind me, is now leading that fight. So it's like, this is nothing new. This shouldn't be anything new for America. This is nothing new for, people to understand.
Right. Yeah. And here's where, President Trump's perspective really comes into play. Say what you will about his approach, but President Trump's foreign policy, it often was focused on strong alliances and very much clear boundaries. We do believe that he'd be more likely to stand with the democratic resistance in Afghanistan rather than the softer approach that we're seeing now.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So it's not, and at the same time, we don't just believe it, right? It's of course, what we're doing is an educated guess, as some would say. It's like, well, put two and two together. This is likely what will happen. But we've also seen proof of this in the last 3 years. So America isn't completely a lost shot, right? Like, we've seen some things from certain members of the US government, right? People who are in Congress. Haven't we seen it, Kumayl? Like, who have been the few people who have raised their voice out of concern for the people of Afghanistan, for the situation there? They're like, what the hell is going on there? Like, we can't just forget Afghanistan. Like, there's something serious is going on there. The Taliban are just oppressing people with impunity. Meanwhile, we had an entire army who sacrificed for that country, many of them who were veterans, and now they've become, policymakers and whatnot. But those congressmen who supported uh, our fight, who are saying, well, we should be supporting the resistance instead of these terrorists who will not just be a harm for Afghanistan, but will end up dealing with terrorists and attacking us one day, right? So can I just ask you, Kamil, what party do those people belong to? Do those people support Kamala Harris
The
or
GOP, they're the
the
GOP, but
GOP?
specifically under Trump and under Trump's leadership. I think he's
Yeah,
even shaping and shifting the I would say reviving more so, but yes, the entire GOP's platform. Um,
okay,
and this is why so many Afghan Americans are looking to Trump's leadership. We're not just talking about a political stance. It's a solidarity. It's solidarity with people who share our dreams for a free Afghanistan. So it's not just about foreign policy alone either. There's another layer to this, and I think this is something that also appeals to many. It's why we see Trump's values seem to resonate with so many in our community. Afghan culture is rooted in family, faith, and community. And lately, there's a sense that those values are being dismissed or downplayed by one side of the aisle.
so
Uh,
let
yeah,
me
I
just
was
ask
just
you
going to
this.
ask you.
Just so it's more clear though, when you're saying like values, are you talking about like the left? Like we've seen this rise in this woke culture, right? Is that what you're referring
Look,
to?
let me put it this way. I think yes, and I think it comes down to respect. In our culture, um, family isn't just important, it's everything, right? We prioritize our faith. We
Mm,
have respect for our traditions, and we want
yeah,
those values to be preserved, not become politicized, right?
yeah,
President Trump's platform today, for all its criticism, it emphasizes family structure, religious
right.
freedom, and respect for tradition in a way that resonates with a lot of us. And exactly as you said, we see that it's not just the far left, or it's become what the Democratic Party stands for.
Yeah,
It's the opposite of these values.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. That
yeah,
and that's the point I was trying to basically, I guess, pry from you is we see what's happening, right? I mean, we have family members, whether it's your niece or nephew or your cousins that are in grade school, and they're being taught things that 10 years ago, even, but definitely 20, 30, 40 years ago, would be seen as like, not just, it would be appalling, it would be insane. It's like, what are we teaching these kids?
mhm.
And yeah, just the very
And we're
root
not
of
alone in
it is,
this, Zoubair. It's not just the Afghans. We've seen it in other Muslim communities too,
oh,
right?
of
Like,
course, it's not even Muslims, bro. It's not
mhm,
just Muslims. Of course,
of
Muslim
course, yeah.
community, Afghan community, immigrant community in general,
Oh, yeah.
um, and just normal people. To be honest, normal like white
What we would
Americans,
consider
Italian
normal, yeah.
Americans. Yeah, it's like they don't like this stuff. It's like, what are we teaching these kids? It's like, what happened to family values? What happened to respecting our elders and respecting religion and all these things? Meanwhile, the left has been making a mockery out of these things. We saw just the Olympics, remember, in Paris? What the hell was that about? Just the things that were going on there, mocking
Oh, right,
Christianity, right?
right
And
outside of
in
there. Yeah.
those opening in the opening ceremony,
I mean,
it's the
Kamala Harris said to a group of Christians. Sorry, it's original to interrupt. It was a group of Christians at her own rally who were chanting, "Jesus is King" or "Jesus is Lord," something along those lines. And
yeah,
she tells them, like, "Get out of here!" I think you guys are at the wrong rally, because there was
there you
apparently
go.
a Trump rally just a few blocks away. It's like, is that who you want as commander in chief, as president of the United States of America? Someone who dismisses Christians for it wasn't even a slogan against her, you know, like,
Exactly.
so us who are Muslim, and then you're telling us that we're crazy for supporting somebody who put up a travel ban for reasons that pertain to national security and have nothing to do with racism or uh, a specific group of people. There were Muslims allowed during that time to come and fly here freely from countries from Muslim countries in the world, but there were certain Muslim countries where we see there is a high security threat, and it only makes sense to restrict travel for some time from those countries, until there's more stability, until there's more peace in their country for there not to be. So yeah, I mean, no part of that is crazy. They want us to think and believe that this is crazy, Zoubair. No part of this is crazy. We're the rational ones here, and they're crazy for making us or wanting us to think that this is crazy.
It's gaslighting. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
definition of gaslighting. But
Yeah.
since you just mentioned that, can we go to that point now, or do you want to mention I know we wanted to talk about the security issue as well. Do you want to touch on that first? Because since you just mentioned that Muslim ban thing, I was going to let's bring up the parallels between what we're seeing from the Arab Muslim community, right, lately in the last couple of days.
Oh, yeah. Let's go ahead and discuss that. Yeah.
Okay. Because it relates with it before we go off topic. So that's funny that you mentioned that, the Muslim ban and things like that. Okay, so the entire Muslim Arab community in the first election, right, 2016, when Trump was running, it was like unanimous. Everyone was like, screw Trump. We're not voting for this guy. He hates Muslims. He's going to deport us all. He's going to throw us in concentration camps or whatever, internment camps. And he's going to block our family members from coming in. We can't leave. We can't come. It was just like this hysteria, right? The fear mongering. Literally everyone was like, we had bought into all of it, and we're like, we're doomed. Islam is over. We're not going to be able to practice our religion. This guy hates us. What happened though, right? The reality is none of that really happened. In fact, most Muslims during that time, most Arabs, not most, like literally, we survived. Nothing happened. Like, we didn't face this backlash. We didn't face, and that's not to say were there cases of incidents of Islamophobia. Did Islamophobia trend up and down during certain times? Of course it did. Just like it did post 9/11. It happens. It goes up and down. And there's certain groups who exploited this Trump presidency, and, but nothing happened, right? And then what are we seeing happening in the last couple of days? Starting with Michigan, I think last week, right? Group of imams, like Muslim leaders, not like a random guy like me and you, like a Muslim leader, beard, thobe, and imam, comes out with several other guys, other imams from an Arab community in Michigan, and they say it's a Trump rally, and they're like, we're supporting Donald Trump. Would we ever think that this is going to happen, right? Like, never in a million years did we think that, oh my God, the Arab community, the Muslim Arab community is going to support Donald Trump. Why is that happening? Like, what is the biggest cause or the biggest concern for the Muslim Arab community right now? It's the Middle East, right? The conflict that's happening in several different areas in the Middle East, starting from the war in Gaza. So I think that this is something we need to tell people who are critiquing us for saying, well, how could you support Trump? Things he said in the past against Muslims, his policies. Look, if the Arab community is coming out and they're in large numbers saying, we're done with Biden after everything that's happened. We're done with this. We're done with not Biden, but the Biden-Harris extension, Kamala Harris, Democratic Party in general, that whole establishment. We're done with it. Then, of course, then we have double the reason to say, well, we're also done with
absolutely
Kamala Harris, and we're going to support Trump. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. It's coming from a common place of, I guess, frustration, right? And this shift, it makes complete sense to me. I think a lot of us, Afghan Americans, Arab Americans, and other Muslim communities, we're feeling a very strong sense of, and a growing sense of disconnect with this current administration, and I guess the Kamala administration would ultimately be the same. I mean, there hasn't even been any attempts of engagement with the community, from what I see. For President Trump, we see, despite so many around him being accused of certain notions of whatever sort or extremes, we see engagement happening. We see, just as you said, an imam of in a community there. These are communities that have traditionally supported Democrats. They're now questioning that loyalty because, they feel their concerns are they're not being. It's not even a matter of represented anymore. It's respected in any way, right? For years, Zubair John, just wanted to come back to what you mentioned about the travel ban and stuff, right? I myself, I believed, like many, that the Democratic Party was the natural choice for Muslims and immigrant communities, right? Um, I rallied. I remember. I'll never forget this. I rallied for Bernie Sanders and stood shoulder to shoulder with people, from different backgrounds who were at the time fighting for change. There were protests that in a sense, to a degree, led against, President Trump's travel ban back in the day. And yeah, we genuinely believed we were supporting a platform that aligned with our values. But what happened, since then, just like I guess, this Arab American community in Detroit, I began, to feel that our voices and our values they're entirely being silenced today, sidelined. This administration's approach to the Biden administration's approach to the Middle East, especially, its support for policies that to many in the Arab community seem to favor one side without understanding the deeper human cost. It's left people disillusioned, right? And then Harris's attempts, this is something, her attempts to address these concerns, everyone sees it for what it is. It's insincere. I just saw something, CNN exposed this, right? She had like messaging, one specific kind of messaging being put out in Detroit, in
Oh
Michigan, and
yeah,
then the complete opposite. I can't remember which state it was, but
I
basically
think it
the
was
exact
PA.
opposite. Yeah, in Pennsylvania, yeah, for the Jewish communities there, right? It's like, what are you doing? Everyone, we all see this. You're not doing anything but hurting yourself. So, sorry, just to like conclude, this isn't just about party loyalty anymore. It's truly about accountability, real policies that address our concerns and respect for our values. That's what it all comes down to, and that's why I, like many Arab Americans in Detroit, am willing to support President Donald Trump. It's not a protest vote. This is not just a protest vote. It's a call for leadership that doesn't take us for granted and holds those in relation to policies and individuals who are responsible for policies accountable, right? We want to see some real change. Enough is enough.
But even if it
Something's
is a
got to give.
protest, even if it is a protest vote, that's good enough. If someone wants to do it
Sure.
as a protest vote to vote for Trump instead of Kamala Harris, whether it's the Arab community, the Muslim community, or Afghans, that's fair enough due to the backstabbing, the betrayal, right? The insult to
Mm-hmm.
our intelligence, what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair, right? To
Mm-hmm.
say that. But then the strategic reasons and just for example, I was saying the Arab community, why they're doing it is because the Middle East, literally, the way that what's going on right now, it literally cannot get worse than what's happening, right? It's a complete mess. The amount of people that have been killed, right? When Trump was asked about this, he said, "Well, this would never have happened if I were president. Like this wouldn't have happened to begin with." And so that's number one. Number two is, well, they also realized that Donald Trump wouldn't have. I already mentioned the protest vote. And then the third one is they knew that
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't go on for this long to this extent and magnitude under a Trump administration because that's again it's part of his nature, part of the way that he operates. He wouldn't allow something for this to go on for this long because he'd be like, it's making me look bad. It makes America look bad. Of course, some might say, well, it's about his own ego. Well, fine, okay. He doesn't want to look bad. He says, we look weak. And he says, I'm embarrassed on behalf of the US. And he vows change. So I think those things right there is enough for the Arab communities on the Middle East issue and for Afghans on our issue. The parallel is there. And then one more thing I just want to say before we get to the next point, is when we saw the community in the Somalian community in Minnesota just yesterday come out and say, also, we're coming out in support of Trump. And he said the same thing. He's like, I know many of you are going to be surprised. He's like, but to his own community, he's saying, we know why we're doing this. Is because he mentions his reasons. But one of the things he says, he admits, he's like, I know Trump is a jerk. He says a more vile word there. He says, I know he's a jerk. He says things directly. He could be
What
mean.
did he say, Zubair?
And we have a bleeper on this show, or can you
Don't
bleep it
worry,
out?
we'll take
Nah,
care of it.
he says that the a hole, right? He says,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
he says, I know Trump is that. He's like, he says things. He's very whatever. He doesn't. He says it as it is. Doesn't shy away. He's like, but at the same time, nothing happened to us. What I was saying earlier. He's like, in the 4 years that he was president, he's like, we were fine, and we know that those things were misrepresented anyway. He wasn't gonna. It was that was the fear mongering, right? The propaganda against him that you're all gonna get deported and that he hates you guys. That's not true. So he's like, nothing happened to us. And the last thing that he said, right? He's like, some of you guys are sad that I'm saying that I'm abandoning my party. He's like, well, guess what? I did not abandon my party. My party abandoned me. Those are Democrats. All those Somalian immigrants. Those are all lifelong Democrats. And now they finally realized that they're like, no, we're being used. We're literally just being used, and they're not delivering for us. And of course, the other things that you mentioned, the family values, the conservative traditional values, this party, the left, the Kamala Harris, doesn't align with us. Whereas Donald Trump, his values do align with us. So yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, those were the parallels there. Now coming back to Afghanistan, however you want to wrap this up, I don't know if you had a next point.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of points, man. One thing that I did want to mention was as far as security, right?
Yes.
So security is something that's very much close, I would say, to every Afghan and of course Afghan Americans. Um, um, and I'm sorry, Zoubair. Yeah. So national security for us over here, right? I guess we did discuss this a bit when we were mentioning, uh, Biden's this current administration's approach and how this affects us over here. But to be a little more specific, right? Right now in Afghanistan, you have a situation that some this is how many national security experts will explain it or put it to you. Say we're right now on September 10th, 2001, one day before 9/11. That's the current situation. But those who actually know what's cooking, what's brewing in Afghanistan, they'll tell you it's not September 10th. It's unprecedented. That's the truth. The reality is we've never actually seen a situation like how we see today in Afghanistan. You have thousands of jihadi training camps all throughout the country. It's not just women and girls education. Boys, I'd rather boys not go to school. Any rational, sane parent would not want their boy to go to school under the Taliban's curriculum because all it is a suicide bomb training center, a jihadi training center. That's what these madrasas are essentially. Um, so when you have that cooking and brewing, you have 20 terrorist organizations, over 20. This is all verified. The United Nations, Bill Roggio from FTD, the Longboard Journal, um, uh, former CIA targeter Sarah Adams. You can go and access this information. It's public information. It's very easy to get this data, to get this information. And you'll see that, yes, over 20 Al Qaeda affiliated terrorist organizations. You have ISIS, you have Al Qaeda, you have every single Islamist jihadist terrorist group that on this planet today with a representation in the one and only Islamic emirate in the world, right? So that's been cooking with us ignoring the situation. It's not just like in the 90s. People say that it's like in the 90s. No, in the 90s, technology wasn't as advanced as it is today. The Taliban didn't already have a 1.0 to learn from their failures in the past. They weren't as big as they are today. And you didn't have this cooperation and collaboration that we see today. We see those who are in the Islamist terrorist world supposed to be adversaries, enemies with one another, becoming friends on one day. Dr. Sajan Gohel on CNN, I remember this was back in 2021. He was saying, between ISIS-K and Taliban, some say, hey, they're enemies. But the truth is, it's like a marriage made in hell. One day they're enemies of one another, and the next day they're they're getting married, they're marrying off each other's daughters and so on. So all of that happening there, and we're here, not bothered. We do have a precedent. We saw what happens when you leave Afghanistan neglected, and that was 2001, the biggest tragedy in our entire history here in the United States. You would think that we'd learn something, a thing or two, right? We've been told one thing and one thing only after August, and that was that, oh, these over the horizon operations will suffice for our national security. Who believes that? I haven't heard this from an Afghan American for me to be able to really discuss, but yeah, who actually is convinced by that, those us relying on the Taliban and whatever capabilities we have over the horizon is going to suffice for our national security. So what's to come if we do nothing? It's much worse than 9/11. That's the point, that our national security right now is this is not for fear mongering or and I'm trying to on this point really speak to my dear sisters and brothers from Afghanistan, Afghan Americans here. You know better than most that this isn't something that we're exaggerating here. We both know, all of us know what the Taliban are capable of, right? They hosted terrorists and weren't willing to give up their leader one time. Now you have terrorist Disneyland in Afghanistan. What they're going to do, I mean, we don't even want to think about that. But yeah, so voting for President Trump, to wrap things up over here, voting for President Trump is one way to avoid, any unwanted disasters, any more unwanted disasters from happening.
Yeah.
Imagine this was the start of President Biden's presidency right now. 4 years of this, without a shadow of doubt, we'd have, we'd see those threats, national security threats, actually coming to, happening.
Yeah, I think and what also is important is that Trump, it's not just us assuming what he would do. I mean, he's said it over and over in many different interviews that everyone who is responsible for this disaster, they're going to be fired, right? I think that's something that's very important. If you want
Yeah.
a continuation of policy, then the same
Oh,
people are
that's
still
right.
going to be there. But
Absolutely.
when you think that there needs to be change, well, then you got to shuffle it around. You got to get rid of people. You got to change policy. And Trump has said that. He said these people day one by 12 o'clock, all of them should be fired. So that's
As an Afghan, if nothing else, right? Because what can you expect? It's been years of nothingness after the betrayal, the great betrayal. So if nothing more than just that, because that's what we know for a fact, that's what we can hold the president accountable to. That. What are you basing your vote for Kamala if in relation to Afghanistan? What are you basing it off of? Her cackle, her chuckle, her laugh? You have nothing, absolutely nothing. You have reason to not vote for her. That's all you have. It's just reason to not vote for her. Claims that she was the last one in the room. She wouldn't change anything. Okay, let's just give our vote.
I think
I'm
people.
sorry, this made me emotional, man.
Yeah, no, when you said like, why would you? I think the only people who are still, if you're from Afghanistan, right, and you say that you're against the Taliban, and you say that you care about what's happening there, but you're still gonna vote for Kamala Harris. At that point, what you're really just showing, what it is, let's just be honest, just admit it, is that you don't want to admit. You don't want to change. You don't want to say, "Hey, I'm gonna go back on those things that I used to say. Those mean, the me calling out Trump and stuff like that." That's so hard for people
So
to do. It's
ultimately,
like
it's the ego.
it's the ego. It's like it's hard for me to admit that. Yeah, I guess he wasn't that bad. I thought in 2016 all of this stuff was gonna happen, deportations and Islam was over and stuff like that, but it didn't happen. So yeah, I have to admit it's not gonna happen now. They don't want to say that. It's because like when you have a history of your Facebook posts all against Trump, and now you have to come out and say, "Oh, I'm going to support Trump." That's a big ego hit. People don't want to do that, and it's like people are also stuck in these what do you want to call it? Identity politics, or that it's really tribalism. If you think about it, the definition of tribalism doesn't mean like you are supporting. It's not like a literal tribal culture in a jungle. Tribalism means whatever sect or group you belong to, you just blindly follow them, even when they're wrong. And you don't want to change. You don't want to admit when you're wrong. You don't want to admit, you don't want to attempt to change. You don't want to look elsewhere. It's like, no, this is my tribe. I back up my tribe no matter what. And it's like anyone that just displays immaturity, that displays arrogance, like you have a big ego. But mature people, rational people, just they look past that. They grow. It's called maturing. And it's like, no, oh yeah, I had those idealistic things back in the day where, yeah, I don't want anything to happen against immigrants, or I don't want, I don't like mean words. I don't like political incorrectness. But it's like you grow and you're like, wait a second, those things are really, we can deal with certain things. It doesn't have to be ideal. That's what idealistic, right? It doesn't have to be, it's not the ideal situation, but this is a better option for us. And we need to be pragmatic. We need to be realistic. And we should go for what the higher odds are for our favor, for our cause. And
Absolutely.
that's just what a lot of people aren't doing. They're stuck in their ways and they don't want to admit it. Anyway, so I really hope our people understand that. It's not about necessarily getting every Afghan. We're not here to convince the Afghan population to go out and vote for Trump no matter what. And it's going to make or break the election. We get that it's not a big enough population necessarily, but at the same time, certain states it might affect, certain swing states or whatever cities it could affect it. But the bigger point is, how can you do not do not like allow yourself to just be used and go for that party that's kicked us when we were down. It's like,
Yeah, no. This is exactly, this is about being real with ourselves and asking like what kind of future do we want to see, right? Uh, who do we trust to actually lead us there? As you said, we're not here to tell you who to vote for, but we are here to say, don't just vote because it's what you've always done, or don't vote that way, right? Vote because that's truly what you believe in. At least that, right? So, as election day comes up, um, yeah, we're asking you to take a step back, really think it over, talk to the people you trust. It's okay to question things. It's okay to change your mind. What's important is that your vote reflects, who you are and what you want for um, your community and for Afghanistan. And yeah, before we do wrap up, I just wanted to say it's not an easy decision. It's personal, it's complicated, and it is uncomfortable for some of us, without a doubt. But yeah, that's also what I guess makes it so important. We're at a point where each of us has to decide what really matters to us, beyond any sort of party lines or labels. One thing earlier when I mentioned national security, I didn't get to actually conclude the point. I just wanted to. I didn't mention how under President Trump it'd be different. Uh, we have his previous administration as far as policies to look at. And when we see in his administration, he took very decisive actions against terrorist organizations, and emphasize the importance of national security. That's why I mentioned national security as a point, or all of the situation that's brewing up and the threats that are emanating from Afghanistan, and why under President Trump's presidency we'd be safer ultimately. Yeah, I have nothing more to add, Zubair John. If there's anything you'd like to add before we wrap up, please.
no, I mean, I don't really have anything. I just want to make one general point. I think we should put ourselves in the shoes of the people who are also in Afghanistan. I understand we mentioned the points about how a Trump presidency would be good for our population here, right? And that's great. But it could be two ways. We could also have reasons for back home, which we mentioned. There's nothing wrong with that. So when we say our people back home, would they want to see an extension, another 4 years of what they've lived through in the last 3 years, right? If you went to a random person in Afghanistan and said, hey, you put the mic to their face and you say, do you want another 4 years of this? What you've been through in 3 years, 4 more years of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, would you want it? No person in Afghanistan would say yes. They would say absolutely no. What's the other option? And then we would say Donald Trump, who's vowed this and this, but they would say, sure, we'll go with him because it can't be worse than her. And if he has said these things, then that's better for us. We're going to go with this. So it should be that simple when you think about what you want for Afghanistan. You're muted, I think.
I was just saying, yeah, absolutely. I'm in full agreement.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up.
So to our viewers and listeners, thanks for listening. Again, we know these are tough conversations, but they're also ones that we need to have if we want to see any kind of real change. So go out, make your voice heard, and let's be part of shaping something better. And remember, it's all about building a future that respects us, our families, and our values. Now, thanks again, and we'll be here next time to keep the conversation going. Until then, stay connected, stay strong, and as always, keep moving forward, keep resisting.